Hello and welcome in this episode of the DAE Vault series. My name is Thijs De Rijcke. I'm a teacher at HOS DAE, where I mainly focus on 2D and 3D art related courses. In this video, we will go over the process of creating a small stylized environment scene. For this, we will only use Photoshop. And we will do this, in this video, we will go over the full process of how you can create something like this. We'll do this generally in 3 steps. So the first step would be starting off with the line art. Second step would then be the rendering setup in this video. So the line art I will go over a little bit quicker. But the render setup will be narrated step by step, real time, because that's actually the most challenging part of the process. And then the third part will be once we have our setup, we can render out the entire thing, which will be just sped up with some nice music underneath. The topic of this video touches a little bit upon the content scene in the Stylized Design and Creation course at HOS DAE. If you would be interested in this content or any of the other video contents for that matter, make sure to check out our digital art and entertainment website, where you'd be able to find more information. The first step in the process would of course be trying to come up with a nice and interesting idea. Often it's very challenging to start off with this, as in most of the times you don't really have a clear and fixed idea yet. For some people this makes it challenging to really start going, but actually if you just start doodling around, making some quick sketches, you allow yourself to let an idea grow while you're working. In this step, it's totally not important to have nice looking line arts or high quality drawings. It's more about exploration and doodling. So if you have a wide range of very fake doodles, this can perfectly be okay to give you an idea of a direction you want to go for. If one of those doodles turns out to be okay looking, we can go to the next step, where we just do another pass on the doodle or the sketch or the rough drawing. And there we will take into account the quality of the drawing. So here we can start to block in all the gaps in the design. So probably some of the lines will be a bit sketchy and hard to read. So we want to make sure everything which is visible in the scene becomes clear, well-defined and readable at this stage. Eventually, depending from the style you want to go for, if it's a style where you want to leave the line art in, you want to spend a bit more time here to have a really crisp and clean line art. If that's not the case, then like for example, the scene here, most of the line art will be gone eventually. So if the line art still remains slightly messy, then that's fine, as long as all the design gaps are filled in. Then the next part would be adding a bit more story into the scene, which is very important to create a sense of a larger universe. Especially this step is important to attract the viewer, to create some more interest in the overall scene. When you have a little bit of a story in the scene, the viewer is going to try to figure out what's going on. Maybe if you just give some hints of a story, the viewer will, like in his own mind, create the rest of the story, which is a fun way to interact with the drawing. And it really helps to make your drawing be a bit more unique and stand out a bit more, or make it more interesting. And then the last step would be pretty straightforward, where we just pick our line art and we do some color passes or material passes for everything we will use. For example, in this scene, we just have the grass, the stone, and then some dirt or secondary type of stone. So 3 straightforward layers, which we will then use in the next step as masks to start our rendering setup. Only the character is really standing out in this case, with some 2 very clear masks, just to make sure, again, when the viewer watches your scene, that the story elements instantly pop and that the viewer sort of wants to try to figure out what is going on. All right, so in the next part, which will be narrated, we will go over the process of setting up our scene to make it ready for the rendering. All right. Okay, so once we have all our masks ready, now we can see why this is so useful. So for now we can start the rendering with the base we have here. The nice thing is we can now just click the layers we have in here, grass, stone, etc. Press Ctrl U, and I can make some adjustments, and we can already like explore a little bit for maybe a more interesting color palette. So maybe we can here go for some more autumn or fall themed vegetation, which is a bit more brownish. We can do the same for the stones here. So it takes some time to set this up, but once you have it, eventually it's something that by default will always save you a lot of time. Okay, so let's say I can go for a color palette, something like this-ish, and now my storytelling elements are still nicely popping. Of course, they won't stay that green. Well, who knows, maybe I like it. It's something different. So now they still stand out, but they're a little bit less prominent. Alright, next thing would be, and now this is the second advantage of our masks. For example, let's say we want to work a little bit with the stone we have in here, so everything for the stone is in one single mask. So now on top of the stone mask, I'm just going to quickly give this a color, so this is nice, so I can easily find this back, maybe blue. Because my stones are a little bit blue, then I find it back really quickly. And then on top of this, I just create a new layer with a clipping mask. And then having this clipping mask, the nice thing is here, and this will be the first thing that I want to do, is I want to decide where my light will be coming from, since that will be very defining for the looks of my scene. So I'm gonna pick a color. Always when going for a lighter value, always make sure we have a little bit of hue shift in there as well. This will make sure our colors are as interesting as possible. And let's say the light will be coming from the top left direction-ish. So every plane on the top is going to be lighter. I'm going to also take into account the fact that the light is going to dim out a little bit towards the back of my scene, so I'm going to watch out that the light isn't as prominent everywhere, but especially here on the top elements, I want to make it a bit more vibrant. It helps here to work as clean as possible, like big bold strokes. I'm going to try to avoid having to redo every stroke a couple of times, just so I have some nice solid shapes in there, or that's the idea generally. And here as well, some light casting on the top of these rocks, something like so. Okay, here as well on the hand of this character, maybe his arm, like everything is still a little bit rough in this line art. Ideally, things should be slightly more defined. But yeah, gives us an idea. And here we'll, since light will be coming from the left, we'll have some shadow. Okay, then again, cool thing, Control U, I still have full control over the color, so maybe I want to make it a little bit lighter. Like this already reads better. Let's see what the saturation does. Maybe not too saturated, something like this. In my case, works fine. Okay, and now the next thing we can do with just a big soft brush eraser, obviously I want the focal point to be here. And I want to guide the eye a little bit, so I'm gonna just erase out the light a little bit on the sides where it doesn't matter. So if I would have a high contrast here, it would obviously distract attention from where I want my attention. And here as well, having too much light here, she's also like a little bit of a focal point. But having too much light here would create contrast, but as is for now, she will already have a nice contrast with the background, so I want to keep everything around here rather soft. Okay, so the cool thing is now we have like that kind of light. I'm just gonna fade it out a little bit in chamfer's part. As we said, it's gonna come from the top left, so maybe here as well there could be some bleed. Don't forget there will be shadow, so maybe just downwards we could have a little bit of gradient. Alright, something like this. And then Well, we basically do the same for the other planes as well. So we have the brownish green, which will be my grass. So same thing here. So I'll also start by defining where the light will be coming from. So same thing. Clipping mask layer, I'm gonna put this one to green for my greenish brownish grass. I'm gonna start to tell where the light will be coming from. So in here again we have that brownish color. So when going for a lighter value, I'm gonna make sure I have a bit of a hue shift to a cooler tone, and then from there we can start blocking in the light. So again, same direction, so it will be coming mainly from there, the light. So with a large soft brush, I'm gonna block in where the light would be coming from. Of course, this is way too much. I'm just gonna start erasing some parts. And then everywhere where I would expect a shadow, like for example here, this part will be casting a shadow. Here as well, since we have a bit of a slanting plane over there. This part as well will cast a shadow. Diagonal shadow. And again, same here, I don't want to create too much contrast there to avoid my character getting lost. So just a little bit. Of course, grass is very diffuse in nature, so I don't want to get too much contrast between the lightest values and the darkest values here. So that's also something to keep in mind, how different materials would be reacting. For example, if this would be metal, the highlight I'm painting should be a lot more bright, obviously. So for the grass, the difference between the darker tone and the softer tone wouldn't be that high. Okay, so something like this. Now this part is very light, maybe attracts a bit too much attention, or something like this. Okay, same thing now. We have maybe here a bit more. Look, this is a bit trial and error, of course. Yep. And then we have the same Control U, and I can still make some adjustments here. See, maybe find something that fits slightly better with my color palette. Maybe going back a bit more to the green, or we can go full autumn, maybe somewhere in between, and see, maybe exaggerating the saturation a little bit could give a cool effect as well, especially the brightness. I think something like this could work. And when doing this, I also tend to look at the navigator a lot, since here you focus a bit too much maybe on the details, or you get distracted by them. By just keeping your focus on this thing, you get a better view of what the general color palette or what the effect of your colors will be on the scene. Okay, and then same thing. We have the stone 2, so everything in here. We could do the same there. New layer, I'm gonna give this new color. And we can start bucking in here as well. Here I definitely want to attract a lot of focus to that area. So a bright value here. A large soft brush. I'm gonna make a nice gradient coming from here towards the bottom of the scene. And here on these steps I can also draw some subtle gradients to bring back a bit more volume in the scene. Okay, that works. Control U to double check the colors. Maybe I want to make it a bit more reddish. yeah, this way we get a nice focal. Okay, next up, we basically do the same, but then in an opposite way, as in now we have, again, the rock, we have a shadow, which is the light. We could name everything, but yeah, it's about speed right now. Speed, don't want to get distracted too much by having these naming conventions. But we're also going to add a shadow layer, so we have light, and then obviously we have shadow as well. So for the shadow, what will be the shadow? So it's unlit by the sun, or my directional light in this case. So it will be lit by the environment, which will probably be blue for something like this. And the sky is blue. So I'm going to make sure there's quite some blue tones in the shadow everywhere. So I'm going to pick a even quite saturated, exaggerated blue tone. I'm going to start blocking in that shadow value everywhere. Again, we have control with the hue saturation layers, so we could always come back to it. This area here, I'm going to make it a bit more subtle. And then here from the bottom onwards, make a soft gradient. And especially here, some nice sense of direction to the statue. Alright, something like this. As you see, it brings back quite some volume to the scene. Here we have some other planes facing the same direction, so make sure not to forget these. Alright, Ctrl U. I'm gonna see if I can tweak the colors a little bit. Maybe you could even go slightly darker here. Alright, then we can also use the opacity layers. If it's a bit too much, we can also always come back to it, tone it down a little bit. Okay, and same for my vegetation. Also gonna see if I can add a bit of shadow there. So something that generally works really well if you go for the highlight for the vegetation, for example. For the highlight, I shifted a little bit to the greener tones. Then for the shadow, I'm gonna do the opposite, and I'm gonna shift more to warmer colors. So that balance creates some nice gradients, which will generally help to get some nice vivid liveliness into your colors. So already here you can start zooming in a little bit so we don't lose too much definition. Okay. And then again, Ctrl U. Maybe even exaggerate the warm element like a lot and make it almost purple, and then of course maybe lower the saturation a little bit, that it's not like fully purple, just like slightly purple-ish. Like this. Okay, and then we can come back in with the correct color. Maybe block it in a bit stronger. All right. And then in here, creating a lot of high contrast, so I want to maybe erase that out a little bit so that statue keeps popping nicely. Yeah, something nice. Something I just noticed, I forgot, the idea was that there's some kind of waterfall running through here. Forgot to implement it. So I'm gonna make a new layer, which on bluish color, to block in this waterfall. Some water here as well, and then here. I'm just gonna do it hard so I don't have any opacity, so I can use it on the same way as I did with the other layers with the mask. So ideally I actually should want to turn off the pressure for this brush. Okay, and then again the same thing, we have full control. So I can find some water tones that fit the scene. Okay, same thing here. We need some light and shadow as well. So new layer on top of this. Also gonna give this a color so I find it back quickly. And then here the water will be a bit more shadowy since there's this bridge. So we'll cast shadow here. And this full part will also be casting a shadow. This is a different plane, so also a bit more shadowy. And same goes for this part. Control U, tweak it a bit. There we go. And then of course, for the stone as well, I might want to add a thing or two here. Okay, so now we have our general color layout. But now we have like very neutral colors overall. So before we continue with this, we might want to again add a bit more gradient that creates for us a bit more of a focal point. So same thing now on top of everything. So just below my line art, where is my line art? Ah, this is my line art. I'll call it line art so I get it back. Now what is this? Ah, it's my character color. Okay, so now on top of everything, I'm gonna create an overall gradient to get some focus there. So for this, I'm just going to select the entire scene. I know the first mask I created was basically everything. So I have a full selection. And then in this layer, we'll just with a massive soft brush. Again, the overall shadow area will be a bit more bluish. You can really boldly click some dark values. And then here this time, I'm gonna use a mask for this. So I have a bit more control, so I can go back with it to a mask, and I'm gonna start erasing back where I want my focus bit. So obviously I want the characters to stand out, this here, or the storytelling elements. I'm gonna give them a color as well. So when pressing Control, you can select them. And then I have a selection, and then I can start painting black in my mask. So they get extracted from what we have here. I'm gonna keep a little bit of gradient towards the bottom. So with X I can switch to white. So even the character has some more focal point to the map, which will then be connected with the thing here. So that's one thing, and then with a soft brush, or another brush, I'm gonna start painting away a little bit of the mask here. No, I still have my selection. I see this will quickly become too much, that's why I'm doing it with a mask, so I can always get back to it. So I just want, because this gradient works for me, right? So I just want to subtly make some elements a bit more visible. And at this stage I'm also definitely thinking about the light direction. You can start adding some secondary volume here and there, some highlights for these rocks. And then of course the statue, which is quite prominent. I want to definitely make sure this at least stands out a bit more. And the advantage of working with this workflow, so I didn't paint any detail in yet so far. This really helps to make sure the overall color palette will be coherent and works well, because those are the main issues. So I'm first making sure those things are working, and before I start thinking about some more like details, like starting to paint in the grass, because at this stage that doesn't matter yet. And once this part of the color palette works, then it becomes, because this is the most challenging part. Here all the main decisions are being made, the overall feel of the scene gets blocked in, the volume gets blocked in. But once you have this correctly and this works, the rest is a bit smooth sailing and a bit more relaxed. I just put on some good music and start blocking in those smaller details, very similar as texturing if you would be working in 3D. Okay, so maybe something like this sort of works. So you see this is very dark right now, but it gives me a nice flow over the scene. Again, same thing, we have the powers of Photoshop, so we can adjust the colors a bit. Maybe make them a bit like fit again the general idea we had with the colors. Do take your time for this process. So as I mentioned before, don't rush this, because this is basically the most important step. Sometimes it helps, like if you're a bit stuck with these, just try out, see what happens if you shift it all the way to the other side. Very often, like this red gives a nice contrast with the blue. Of course, it's a bit too much, so we just lower down the opacity a bit more. But by just going over it quickly, we had the chance to try it out. Yep, something like this could potentially work. Okay. Yeah, if we compare both, like the reddish, make sure that we have a nice framing for the line we have in here. So this, which is important for our story, and it nicely gets framed by everything which is now blue. That's making a high contrast with everything else in the scene. Okay, and we still have the mask, so now I feel like some of these elements could stand out slightly more. So I can still make them pop a bit better. Here as well, maybe this guy should generally be a bit brighter overall. And instead of just painting my highlights with some color here, by making use of these masks, the advantage here is that I'm also going to have a gradient in my values automatically. So if I know there was a gradient underneath, so if I paint away, I'm just painting in the mask. So if I make it a bit black here and a bit black there, I know the highlight value here is going to be stronger than there. Just subtly, very slightly, but it makes a difference overall. Gives more nuance in your colors. Alright, anyway. Okay, so then the next thing would be, again, the opposite. So we added shadow. If we add shadow, we also want to add a little bit of light. And something that I really like for this is a color dodge layer. So one layer to color dodge, some really overkill warm tone here. I'm not gonna make any mask for it because it's fine if it bleeds a bit into the background. I'm just gonna enhance the storytelling part. So a lot of focus to where the sword will be, and then a bit on my character as well. Just a little bit, so she nicely stands out. And then on the map, because that was sort of the idea, that the map is linked to the treasure. So we have a bit of an exaggerated focal there. Maybe some on this treasure as well. So we get the idea that she's been doing this for some time. Okay, works sort of. Maybe here for the character as a tertiary small focal point. I'm gonna give him a little bit of blue color dodge to also make him read slightly better. And then again, same thing. Not Control U. This is way too much, obviously. We can see if we can shift it to something. It works a bit better. too much, and then we just tone it down. But as you see, like now, definitely when looking back at this, my colors are really dull, just giving a bit of color dodge. Also get this gradient, since color dodge boosts all your colors and like overlays that color, so we now get a nice reddish tint and everything here. We also get an overall gradient for the scene, and gradients are key. Try to see what the difference between shifting your opacity and your fill does here. It works differently when using opacity layers, so I think it works like this affects the effect. And the other thing is just a layer, so when working with color dodge, it sometimes helps shifting the opacity. Okay. So this would then be the setup, so we have most of our colors locked in correctly here. So the next thing would then be, since now our line art is still a bit too distracting, see if we can get rid of that. So now without the line art we start to have some color palettes that starts to work, and the scene overall is already quite readable. So that means we can start to lower down the line art a little bit, just gonna make it less prominent. And then same thing for the line art as well, Control U. I can colorize the line art and give it a little bit of color. So by boosting up the opacity a lot and the color, I can make them some purplish, somewhat warmer color that fits our scene well. And quite often this can give you a nice effect. Okay. Alright, next up, the next thing that's really distracting for me right now is the background, which is way too bright, so maybe I can see if I can make that maybe a bit darker, so the scene on itself stands out a bit better. And then we also get that nice color dodge effect we had around the sword. Again, I'll see what happens if we colorize it. Not like this, of course, but overall the scene is orangey reddish, so something blue would be nicely complementary with that. Of course, we don't want it blue like this, just slightly blue. To create a bit of contrast. Okay, and then here for this scene as well, what we could do is add a bit of gradient. And then here around the focal scene could still be slightly brighter. Watch out with the background. I generally still want it to be as neutral as possible, because at this stage we're focusing on the scene, not the presentation. We have now a layout for our color, or a base for the colors, but we still need to add the definition back in there, of course, because right now we only have a base. Alright. Something I noticed right now is the color dodge is a bit too much, especially around the scene, so that bleed is not really appealing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make just select the layer. Again, we have the mask for our full scene, which is in the grass generally. If we hold Shift, we can add the other parts as well. Control Shift, click those to add those to the mask. So the sword, for example. Then when I have this selected, Control Shift I can invert the selection. We can erase a little bit of the bleed away from the scene. I think that works a lot better. It was way too much. Okay. So now we can take some time to step back and take a look at the scene, what is bothering. So when zooming out, you get a better idea of this, or better overview. And especially for me, the shadow layer is still lacking a little bit. Like here we get some, like, not really a tasty color. So I'm gonna search that for that layer. It was the shadow layer of my stone, so it should be this one, I think. Yeah, and as we see, especially here it sort of works, but here it just makes my colors a bit too muddy, I think. I'm gonna see if I can erase those out a bit. Maybe here as well. And then I think for the grass we have a little bit the same issue. Yeah, or the shadow layer there also creates some distracting spots, especially like here. And it's caused basically by the base color. So what I'm gonna do is, above the base color, I'm gonna add a new soft layer. I'm gonna paint back in some warmer colors. And I think generally it's also caused by the shadow we have here. So in this mask, we still have the mask. Okay, I can get rid of it a bit more as well. Alright, so let's leave it at this for now, and in the next stage we will continue on this base and we will start to bring back some definition to the scene.